Well, hey there team, welcome back to the channel and welcome to my overview of Worshippers of Cthulhu. So for those not across it, I do overviews on this channel. It's where I have a look at the first 2 hours of a game. It's the Steam refund window. Steam says that you can make up your mind about whether you want to keep a game or not in that time, and broadly speaking, I would agree and say generally as a rule, 20 hours in, you're not going to change your mind about how you felt 2 hours in. So it's a short punchy video, give you the broad strokes info, keep it around 10 minutes, and you can make up your mind on your own. So, a few interesting things going on here. Let's lead with this. This is a sort of narrative colony builder type game. It leans much more towards Anno. This is a micro subgenre that started to blow up in recent years, probably most popularized by something like Frostpunk. I think Ixion is the best second place holder, and we've had various attempts over the years following. These guys making this, Crazy Goat Games, they actually released a similar game not that long ago, like months ago, surely, called Republic of Pirates. So I don't know what's going on there. Maybe they've sort of got an A-B team, or they're splitting between two projects or whatever, because I wouldn't call it shovelware, though the release cycle, especially from a relatively unknown studio, kind of indicates maybe it could be. Also, couple that with the fact that I was fairly down on Republic of Pirates. There were a lot of issues with it at launch. Some of my comments following it said that they were very quick to patch the problems. I can't even remember the specifics, quality of life sort of stuff. But if I recall correctly, I was a little bit jaded because you would think this is something that you'd pick up during your development cycle before release. Anyway, that's a little bit of backstory. Was I too harsh on Republic of Pirates? Maybe it's in a better state right now. It wasn't necessarily terrible. And given that this, not to drag it along, but I really quite like this, in its kind of janky, earnest, more indie approach, I still think what's here is actually really cool, and what they've done to make it Cthulhu Anno is very clever. I suppose what I'm trying to get at is maybe I need to go back and have a look at Republic of Pirates. I'm curious if anyone else has had a look at it in recent times. Maybe it's not as bad as I made it out to be. Because this, Worshippers of Cthulhu, is very cool. If you don't like Anno, I don't know, man. You have to be a real hardcore Cthulhu nut to get past that, but I think a lot of people do enjoy the kind of Anno model of production chain management, and after my 2 hours with this, I'm just starting to get into what looks like the kind of promotion of citizenry levels and the requirements. But yeah, I suppose you could be derivative and just say it's Anno with a Cthulhu slap of paint, but it's done that incredibly well. There are some standouts that make it go beyond the slap of paint disparagement. Great example is your citizens will have kind of like a preferred workplace, kind of like Against the Storm. In fact, there's a few things in here that remind me a lot of Against the Storm. A fantastic game, really shook the genre up, but like you've got a Cthulhu patience meter, which is straight out of that game. It's cool to see, to be honest. But yeah, on my original point, you will have, like, I don't know, a dude prefers to be a lumberjack, and you'll get bonuses to his fervor as a sort of cult worshipper in your little cult island getaway. But perhaps you want to change that. Maybe you want him to prefer to be a sheep farmer, something like that. There is a building, some sort of worship temple, I can't remember the name, and you can do a ritual on them, and it puts you into this sort of mini game where it's their bare back of he or she, and they're like trembling because they know what's going to come next, and you've got a ceremonial dagger and a book of recipes, and it's like something you'd see out of maybe more of an action RPG where you got to do the correct shape with your wand. I'm using my hands, but there'll be in the book, there'll be a whole bunch of different carvings. Macabre as it is very on point with this game and this setting. But yeah, maybe you have to carve a big circle down one side of their back, or maybe like a little bump down the bottom or whatever. So you essentially Bob Ross this poor prick's back with a ceremonial dagger, and they're screaming and all that, and then that's how you kind of change their preferred class type. There are all sorts of other things as well. A big part of the sort of, you could call it the research tree, is kind of favor points with your gods, and that's done by carving like little statues at their ritual points. Essentially what you're doing is kind of crafting out of the Anno ingredients, to use the touchstone. So, you know, at the moment I'm making clothes for people, I'm getting into making more complex stuff like ale. But at the base level, you can make planks from a sawmill. And so the first entry point sort of statue sacrificial thing that you can carve up is made out of planks. And so you commit the planks to it, it starts a timer, and then when it cashes in, a big old bloody tentacle monster comes up and goes, oh yummy, and grabs the bloody paddle pop stick that you just made for him, and you get these research points that can be turned into unlocking new buildings, but also can be an actual building mat themselves. And then there's multiple little sacrificial worship points as well, so it's not just that one for the research point upgrade, but for example, the way you get more people onto your island is ships that run adrift. They're sort of beckoned across by the dark powers, so you do have this kind of ticking over timer that you can augment with fervor, which is kind of your just general morale in a way for your island. But you do have this timer that will give you more units. But if you want more workers, you can do the same thing. You can carve up statues. And then there's higher tier little sacrificial statues that will require higher tier work goods. It's very clever. It's a great way to deal with surplus in that anno space, because surplus is great. It acts as a buffer to growth in these kind of colony management type games. But generally speaking, there's not really a reward feedback loop designed around surplus. You know, something like a Frostpunk, you might want to store up food for X months to try and stave off the temperature drop, but that's still kind of a negative feedback loop, if you will. You're using it to stave off the stick, whereas this game's using the carrot. And then another thing that they address that I kind of hate about Anno is the PvP ship battle, whatever you want to call it. And I know I'm not alone in that. As the Annos have gone on, and their idea of sort of beefing up the antagonistic component, which you don't really need in a colony sim. The antagonistic component is you being anal about min-maxing your colony's pipeline. But the idea of having to battle other ships on the open seas and getting attacked and invaded and that sort of stuff, it's never really worked, I don't think, really for any Anno ever. Broad blanket statement, but I've been playing them for a fair few years. I find it always to be the weakest part, trying to just jam combat into a game as a second fiddle component that feels second fiddle. It just doesn't feel like the main draw, and it's more of an embuggerance. So in this, you don't really have a fleet or anything per se. While there are hostile ships moving around, they're not really antagonistic, at least not in the early going, and there are other islands with other resources that you're going to want to claim. And in order to address that, what you do is summon kind of monsters from the sea, similar to the previous thing we were talking about, but you know, there's human sacrifice, so you've got to sacrifice some of your workers, and you get these little gory cut scenes of dudes getting torn apart by tentacles, and then you essentially summon this bloody, you know, you get to play as the Kraken from Sea of Thieves, so there's a bit of a 180 flip, and he's on a bit of a decaying summon timer, and as he takes damage from combat, it will speed that along. But it's very clever. And I can see the similarities to Republic of Pirates, because the combat in that was kind of crummy, if I recall, because you only had a couple of units and you couldn't really group them. I think they patched it and fixed it, and that was my main complaint. But it was trying to get you to do some sort of smaller micro, but even then it still didn't have the quality of life. Well, with this, you're pretty much just driving around this bloody Cthulhu Zeppelin monster thing to eat up and destroy islands and that, and it's a cool little mini game that doesn't take up too much of your time. You don't have to build up a bloody fleet or anything like that. You just sacrifice for a thing every now and then, and I'm pretty sure it's got a fairly long cooldown timer as well. So the game is built and incentivizes around just interacting with this as required, as opposed to kind of clogging up the main gameplay loop. Anyway, and I haven't even really talked about the basics, but like I said, if you've played Anno, if you've played these colony management type games before, it's very much par for the course. But again, even things like I've got multiple islands on this starting mission that I've been doing, and it all goes into a global storage, which is great, which is something that I'm pretty sure you don't get in Anno. Like you, if I recall, geez, it's been so long. Like you have to set up trade lanes between islands. So if you've got an island over here getting bloody cocoa beans or something like that, if you want it on your other island, you have to transport it back and forth, and then you got to protect it from pirate lines. And I always didn't like that. What I like here is it's still a video game, and it's supposed to be fun first. I've got an island producing stone, and manufacturing stone. Homeless people go into the empty houses. You can't move them between islands, so you do have to be careful about where your workforce lives and then cater to their needs. But ultimately, as long as I'm producing stone on one island, I'm getting it on another. And same goes for things like corn and all that sort of crap. So it's taken out that kind of embuggering, longer chain, protecting convoys nonsense, which I find slows down Anno. So yeah, a cool little game, a great second attempt for Crazy Goat. Like, again, the release cycle is so close. They've clearly been doing them back to back. After Republic of Pirates. But where I was down on that, I'm very up on this. This is really cool. And like I said, it's got some quality of life, dare I say, simplifications that it's doing better than some of the big guns in the space already. Not to mention, it's great that it sticks to the theme and does some really clever, inventive stuff. And part of wanting to play more of it is like, oh, what else is going to be introduced along the Cthulhu mythos line? Anyway, team, these are my thoughts. I'm a big fan. Check it out yourself, especially if you're a fan of, like I said, either Anno or Anno-likes or Cthulhu in any shape or form. You'd be mad not to at least have a look. All right, team, that's enough from me. Might just leave it there for the time being, and I'll catch you guys on the next one.